My parents just smilingly signed a $50,000 check for my sister to buy a mansion and immediately threw a $5,000 tax debt and a muddy plot of land in my face. They called me the disappointment of the family because at 35 I was still unmarried and forced me to clean up that garbage myself. 3 years later, when my sister drove past that exact piece of garbage land, she called my dad screaming in despair. They will never be able to forget the payback I had prepared. My name is Simone. I am 35 years old, and somehow I am still trying to heal the wounds inflicted by my own family. As an urban planner and commercial real estate developer, I moved out early to escape their toxicity, but occasionally kept in touch out of a slight sense of blood obligation. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching this video from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to stand up to relatives who constantly underestimated your worth. Growing up in a middle-class Black family in Atlanta meant you always had to maintain a perfect facade for the community and the church folks. My parents, Thomas and Denise, were masters at building that image. But behind the doors of our pristine red brick house, coldness and favoritism lived in every single corner. Last Thanksgiving, they invited me to the family dinner. The air in the dining room was filled with the smell of butter-roasted turkey and baked sweet potato pie, but I could feel the familiar suffocation the moment I stepped through the door. Sitting across from me was Brianna, my 32-year-old sister, who always played the role of the perfect golden child. Beside her was Spencer, her white husband, who worked as a financial broker with a constant condescending smirk on his face. They had just gotten married, and of course all the attention at the dinner table was entirely focused on this golden couple. The clinking of crystal glasses rang out sharply, cutting through the small talk. My dad, Thomas, cleared his throat and stood up with the demeanor of a successful man who loved handing out favors. He pulled a thick envelope from his vest pocket, smiled proudly, and pushed it across the table toward Brianna and Spencer. "Your mother and I are so proud of you two," he said in a booming voice. "Here is a $50,000 check from us to help you put a down payment on that house in the wealthy Buckhead neighborhood. Go build a home that matches the standard of this family." Brianna shrieked with joy, grabbing the check and hugging her husband tightly. Spencer gave a victorious smirk and gave a slight nod to my dad, as if he had just closed a lucrative business deal. I just sat there taking a sip of red wine, trying hard not to roll my eyes in exhaustion. I was too used to this scene. But right as I was about to set my wine glass down, my mother Denise suddenly turned to me. The affectionate smile on her lips vanished, replaced by a cold and deeply judgmental glare. She pulled a yellowed file folder with frayed edges from under the table and without a single word threw it directly onto the porcelain plate in front of me. The folder landed with a thud, splattering a few drops of barbecue sauce onto my silk blouse. I frowned, looking down at the faded words written on the cover. It was the deed to a swampy piece of land in the far suburbs, the land that Great Aunt Ruby had left behind before she passed away. My mother tilted her chin up, her sharp voice echoing clearly across the dining room. "This is your portion, Simone. It is an abandoned plot of land with $5,000 in back taxes. You are 35 years old, unmarried with no children, and you contribute absolutely nothing to this household. You have the most free time, so go clean up Aunt Ruby and her mess yourself. Make sure you pay those taxes in full with your own money and do not let that bad debt ruin the perfect credit score of this family." The entire dining room fell completely silent. Her words were no different than a burning slap across the face right in the middle of a holiday dinner. They had just given their youngest daughter $50,000 to buy a luxury mansion and immediately after tossed their oldest daughter a tax debt and a worthless pile of mud. Brianna covered her mouth with her napkin, giggling softly, while Spencer shook his head, feigning pity. He crossed his legs, leaned back in his chair, and used that deep voice reeking of cheap new money arrogance to speak up. "You know, Simone, if you are having trouble scraping together $5,000, I could introduce you to some unsecured loan funds at my firm. The interest rates are a little high, but at least you will not have to go begging anyone. Do not make your parents worry about your incompetence any longer." I stared intensely at the bright red tax notice clipped inside the folder. 20 years ago, I probably would have burst into tears, run up to my room, and locked myself in. 10 years ago, I probably would have slammed my hands on the table, stood up, and screamed in their faces about this sickening injustice. But the 35-year-old me, a black woman who had personally negotiated multi-million-dollar commercial contracts, simply analyzed the situation in absolute silence. This swampy piece of land was sitting directly on the planned expansion route of the new highway, which was internal zoning information I had just received last week. To me, it was not trash. It was an exposed gold mine that these arrogant, narrow-minded people sitting at this table would never have the vision to recognize. I slowly lifted my head without a single tear, without a single word of complaint. I looked straight into my mother's eyes and then shifted my gaze to the mocking smile of my brother-in-law. My hand gently stroked the old faded deed, and I just gave a slight smirk, a smile so cold and so calm that it made the air in the room suddenly drop heavy and still. 3 years is a long time for people who live on borrowed money, but it is barely enough time to build an empire from the dirt up. I did not spend those 3 years crying over a family that never wanted me. Instead, I traded my silk blouses for high-visibility vests and steel-toed boots. That swampy piece of land in the suburbs was a logistical nightmare on the surface. It was overgrown with weeds, flooded with runoff water, and burdened with that $5,000 tax lien. But underneath the mud, it was a gold mine just waiting for the right permits. As a commercial real estate developer, I knew exactly which doors to knock on at the Atlanta City Council. It took 14 months of relentless zoning board meetings, environmental impact studies, and soil testing to get the classification changed from agricultural waste to prime commercial real estate. I drained my entire savings account and worked 80-hour weeks often, sleeping on a small cot in my office. I secured a massive construction loan using my own flawless credit and the newly appraised value of the rezoned land. We cleared the mud, laid the concrete foundation, and began erecting the steel framework for a state-of-the-art commercial plaza and logistics hub. While I was standing in ankle-deep mud reviewing blueprints under the pouring rain, my sister Brianna was busy living her best life on the internet. Even though I never reached out to them, I could not escape the constant updates. Mutual friends and extended relatives made sure I saw every single post. My mother Denise publicly shared every milestone of her golden child. There was Brianna posing in front of her 5-bedroom mansion in Buckhead, looking like a magazine cover model. There she was leaning against a brand new leased Range Rover, complaining about the stress of decorating her massive living room. And there was Spencer popping champagne bottles on a rented yacht in Miami, acting like the Wolf of Wall Street. They looked like the perfect, wealthy couple, the absolute pride of the local church community. My parents paraded them around every Sunday, boasting about their rich white son-in-law and his brilliant financial mind. But working in commercial development, you learn how to read between the lines of flashy lifestyles. I knew the housing market was shifting. I knew the interest rates on those adjustable mortgages they loved so much were skyrocketing. And I knew that Spencer, with all his arrogant talk, was heavily overleveraged. They were burning through cash to maintain a flawless facade, while I was quietly pouring concrete to secure a permanent legacy. I was building wealth while they were accumulating debt. By the end of the 3rd year, my project became impossible to hide. The new highway expansion had been officially announced to the public, causing property values in the area to absolutely skyrocket overnight. My site was no longer a muddy secret hidden behind overgrown trees. It was a massive commercial construction zone buzzing with giant cranes, dump trucks, and hundreds of workers wearing hard hats. The main structure of the plaza was already dominating the skyline of the intersection. And right at the front gate, facing the newly paved main road, I had my contractors put up a giant illuminated billboard. It boldly displayed the architectural rendering of the upcoming commercial hub, along with my name proudly listed as the sole developer and owner. I was standing inside the makeshift site office one humid Tuesday morning, going over the final glass facade installations with my lead engineer. The smell of fresh asphalt and welding filled the morning air. My phone suddenly buzzed on the metal desk, vibrating against a stack of blueprints. I glanced at the screen and felt a sudden chill run down my spine. It was a number I had not seen on my screen in 3 full years. It was my father, Thomas. I had blocked their numbers initially, but eventually unblocked them for emergency purposes, though I never actually expected them to reach out. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear without saying a single word. I did not hear my father's booming, authoritative voice demanding respect. Instead, the speaker exploded with the frantic, hysterical screaming of my sister. "Brianna, Simone, what the hell is going on?" She shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer panic over the loud sound of her car engine. "I am driving past the highway interchange right now. Why is there a multi-million-dollar construction site on our land? You lying, deceitful thief, you stole our inheritance." I simply took a slow sip of my black coffee, smiled at the sweet sound of her crumbling reality, and prepared for the war they were about to bring right to my front gates. I listened to her panting on the other end of the line. The background noise of her car engine roared as if she had pulled over on the shoulder of the highway just to scream at me. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. "You knew," Brianna shrieked, her pitch reaching a level that forced me to hold the phone away from my ear. "You knew this land was valuable and you stole it from us. Spencer said that land was worthless. You manipulated Mom and Dad into signing away our fortune, you deceitful thief." I could hear a scuffle on the other end of the line. Then the heavy breathing of my father took over the microphone. Simone Thomas barked. His voice carried the same arrogant authority he used when he handed Brianna that $50,000 check 3 years ago. But this time, there was a frantic edge to it, a desperate tremor that he simply could not hide. "I demand to know what is happening on that property right now. Brianna is telling me there are cranes and bulldozers. She says there is a giant billboard with your name on it claiming you are the owner." "Your eyesight is as good as ever, Dad," I replied calmly, taking another sip of my coffee. "It is a commercial plaza and logistics center. I am the sole developer and the sole owner, just like the paperwork you and Mom so eagerly signed stated." "You tricked us!" he roared. The sheer audacity of his words almost made me laugh out loud. "You deliberately withheld information from your own family. That land was part of your great-aunt Ruby's estate. It belongs to all of us. You will halt construction immediately until we can get this sorted out legally." "Halt a $30 million construction project because you suddenly realized you threw away a gold mine?" I asked, keeping my tone entirely conversational. "I think not. You listen to me, you ungrateful child," Thomas shouted, his voice echoing through the phone speaker. "Your sister is struggling right now. Spencer is facing a very rough quarter at the financial firm, and their mortgage is adjusting. We are a family, and we share our blessings. You will put Brianna's name on that deed by the end of the day, or I swear to God I will have Spencer unleash his corporate lawyers on you. We will sue you for fraud, and we will take everything you have built." I set my coffee cup down on the metal desk. The amusement faded from my eyes, replaced by the cold, hard focus that had gotten me to the top of the commercial real estate world. "Let me refresh your memory, Thomas," I said, dropping the title of Dad. 3 years ago, you sat at a Thanksgiving table and called me a failure. You handed your golden child $50,000 and handed me a $5,000 tax debt. You literally told me to clean up the garbage so it would not ruin your precious credit score. You signed a legally binding, unconditional waiver of rights because you were terrified of owing the government a few pennies. He tried to interrupt, but I cut him off sharply. "Do not ever threaten me with Spencer's rented lawyers. If you want to take me to court, I will gladly show a judge the exact documents you signed. Now lose my number." I ended the call before he could utter another syllable. I did not just hang up, I went into my settings and blocked his number again. The silence in my makeshift office was deeply satisfying. But I knew my family. I knew their boundless greed and their obsession with maintaining their wealthy image. A simple phone call was never going to be the end of this. They had just tasted the possibility of millions, and they were desperate enough to do absolutely anything to get their hands on it. I walked out of the office and flagged down my head of site security, a broad-shouldered ex-military man named David. David, I said, looking him in the eye. I need you to double the security presence at the main gate immediately. We might have some uninvited guests trying to trespass on the site today. David nodded, tapping his radio. Understood, boss. Nobody gets past the perimeter fence without an appointment. I turned back to look at the massive steel beams rising into the clear Atlanta sky. This was my empire. I had bled for it. I had starved for it. I had worked through the night analyzing soil samples and arguing with city planners while they were busy pretending to be rich on the internet. They were not going to take a single dime from me. Less than an hour later, my walkie-talkie crackled to life. Ms. Simone David's voice came through the static sounding tense. We have a situation at the front gate. A black Range Rover just tried to bypass the security checkpoint and almost ran over one of our traffic cones. The occupants are refusing to leave, and they are demanding to see you right now. I looked down the long dirt access road leading to the highway. There it was. Spencer's leased luxury SUV aggressively parked at an angle, completely blocking the entrance for the cement trucks. I could see the doors swinging open. My mother, my father, my sister, and her arrogant white husband stepped out into the blazing Georgia heat. They looked completely out of place standing in the mud, wearing their expensive designer clothes and leather shoes. They had come to claim what they foolishly believed was theirs. But they had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with anymore. I stood at the threshold of my site office watching them navigate the treacherous terrain of an active construction zone. Watching Brianna try to walk through thick, wet Georgia clay in a pair of red-bottom heels would have been hilarious if the situation was not so deeply pathetic. She stumbled, her ankles wobbling wildly, while Spencer gripped her arm, looking around the site with a mixture of sheer awe and absolute greed. My father marched ahead of them, his chest puffed out, attempting to project the same intimidating presence he used at Sunday church service. My mother trailed behind, clutching her designer handbag like a shield, her face already twisted into a mask of wounded motherhood. I did not walk out to meet them halfway. I simply crossed my arms over my high-visibility vest and waited for them to come to me. The noise of the site was deafening. A massive cement mixer was pouring foundation for the east wing of the plaza, while steelworkers shouted orders over the roar of diesel engines. It was the sound of progress, the sound of wealth being built from the ground up, and my family was completely out of their element. David, my head of security, stepped up beside me, his hand resting casually on his radio. He glared at the approaching group. "Do you want me to turn them around right now, boss?" he asked, his voice low and professional. "Not yet, David," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on my father's red face. "Let them speak. I want to hear exactly what kind of delusion they have cooked up on the drive over here." When they finally reached the metal steps of my office, Brianna was the first to explode. Her perfectly styled hair was blowing wildly in the wind, and her shoes were completely ruined by the mud. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a monster, Simone," she screamed, her voice shrill and grating. "You knew about this. You knew this land was worth millions. And you sat there at Thanksgiving and acted like a victim. You stole from your own family." I looked at her ruined shoes and gave a slow, deliberate smile. "I did not steal anything, Brianna. I paid $5,000 for a tax lien that none of you wanted to touch. You were too busy celebrating your $50,000 handout to care about a piece of swamp." My father stepped forward physically, pushing Brianna aside to take control of the conversation. His face was a mask of furious, righteous indignation. "You listen to me right now," he boomed, pointing his finger at me, just like he used to do when I was a terrified teenager. "You manipulated us. You used your insider knowledge as an urban planner to trick your mother and me into signing away our rights to this property. That is fraud, Simone. It is illegal, and it is a sin against your own blood." I let out a harsh laugh, shaking my head at the sheer audacity of his words. "A sin against my blood." I repeated the words, tasting bitter on my tongue. Where was this deep concern for family 3 years ago? Thomas, where was this love when you handed me a debt and called me a failure in front of your shiny new son-in-law? You signed a legally binding waiver of liability because you were terrified the city would garnish your wages for Aunt Ruby's unpaid taxes. You threw me under the bus to protect your pristine credit score. You do not get to play the victim now that the bus has turned into a gold mine. My mother Denise immediately switched tactics. Seeing that anger and authority were not working, she instantly shifted into the role of the heartbroken matriarch. She pressed her hands to her chest, her eyes welling up with fake tears. "Simone, please," she whimpered, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Do not be so cold. We are your family. We raised you. We provided for you. We gave you a roof over your head. You cannot just cut us out of this blessing. God gave us this land to share." She took a step closer, reaching out to grab my arm, but I took a step back entirely out of her reach. "Do not touch me," I warned, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You did not give me anything except unrealistic expectations and constant criticism. When you found out this land had a tax debt, you literally called it garbage and tossed it on my dinner plate. Now that it is a $30 million commercial development, you suddenly remember. You are my mother. Save the tears, Denise. They do not work on me anymore." That was when Spencer finally decided to step into the ring. He pushed his way to the front, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive tailored suit. He looked at me with that same condescending smirk he wore 3 years ago. The look of a mediocre white man who believed he was the smartest person in any room he walked into. "Let the adults talk for a second," Simone Spencer said, his tone dripping with arrogance. "Look, you pulled a fast one. I will admit it was a clever little scheme for someone in your position. But the game is over now. You are playing in the big leagues and you are completely out of your depth." Gestured around the construction site, waving his hand at the heavy machinery. "I ran a quick background check on your little LLC while we were driving over here. You took out a massive commercial loan to fund this phase of construction. You are leveraged to the hilt. You need this project to stay perfectly on schedule or you will default." I stared at him, my expression completely unreadable. "And what is your point, Spencer?" "My point is that you do not have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle," he stated confidently, crossing his arms. "I work for one of the largest financial firms in Atlanta. I have corporate attorneys on speed dial. If my father-in-law files a lawsuit claiming deceptive practices and fraud regarding the transfer of this deed, we can tie this property up in litigation for years. We will file an injunction to halt your construction. Your lenders will see the legal risk, and they will freeze your credit line immediately. You will lose everything, Simone." He leaned in, closer, lowering his voice to a threatening growl. "Or you can be smart about this. We will draft an addendum to the deed. You give Brianna a 50% equity stake in the development, and we walk away. You get to keep playing real estate mogul, and the family gets what rightfully belongs to them. It is a win-win." I looked at my family. My father was nodding in agreement, looking at Spencer with absolute pride. My mother was wiping away her fake tears, looking hopeful. Brianna had her arms crossed, looking incredibly smug, as if she had already won the lottery. They actually believed this was going to work. They believed that because I was a black woman standing alone against a white finance broker and my own toxic parents, I would simply fold under the pressure. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen a few times, pulling up a digital scan of the exact document they had signed 3 years ago. I held the screen up right in front of Spencer's face. "Read the header of this document." "Spencer," I commanded, my voice echoing over the noise of a passing cement truck. "Read it out loud." Spencer narrowed his eyes, trying to read the bright screen in the sunlight. "Unconditional waiver of liability and transfer of deed," he muttered, his smirk faltering slightly. "Now read section 4. I pushed the phone closer to him. "The part that your beloved father-in-law signed without even reading because he was so eager to get rid of me." Spencer read the text, and his face suddenly went completely pale. The signatory completely and irrevocably surrenders any and all future claims of equity revenue or ownership regarding the property, regardless of any future changes in zoning valuation or commercial development. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. I wrote that contract myself, I said softly, but my words cut through the air like a knife. I had it reviewed by the best real estate attorney in the state of Georgia before I even brought it to that Thanksgiving dinner. There is no legal loophole, Spencer. There is no fraud. They signed it willingly in front of witnesses to avoid a $5,000 tax penalty. If you try to take this to a judge, you will be laughed out of the courtroom, and I will countersue you for frivolous litigation and legal fees. Spencer's jaw clenched tight. The confident, arrogant finance bro persona was rapidly slipping away. He realized he had absolutely no leverage. You are bluffing, he snapped, his voice rising in panic. No bank will continue funding a project with a pending family lawsuit attached to it. I know people in the financial sector. Simone, I can make one phone call and make you financially toxic. I can freeze your assets. I threw my head back and laughed. It was a genuine, full-throated laugh that echoed across the site. You think you have power over my funding, Spencer? You are a mid-level regional broker at a firm that leases its office space. I am a commercial developer, building a hub for international logistics companies. You do not know the first thing about my financial backers, and you certainly do not have the power to freeze my assets. Brianna stomped her muddy foot, screaming like a spoiled toddler. It is not fair. We need that money. Simone Spencer made some bad investments, and our house in Buckhead is going into foreclosure. Our mortgage rate adjusted, and we cannot afford the payments. You have millions of dollars right here. You are supposed to be my sister. The truth finally came spilling out. The golden couple was completely broke. The $50,000 handout had vanished, and their luxury lifestyle was entirely built on a mountain of credit card debt and adjustable rate mortgages. They were drowning, and they had come here looking for a life raft that they could steal from me. I looked at Brianna with absolute disgust. 3 years ago, Spencer told me to get a high-interest loan to survive. He told me not to bother the family with my incompetence. Well, Brianna, my advice to you is the exact same. Go find a payday lender. Downsize your life. Sell that ridiculous Range Rover. But you are not getting a single penny from this property. My father took a threatening step toward me, raising his hand as if he was going to grab me by the collar. You insolent little brat, he roared. I brought you into this world and I can ruin you. I will not let you humiliate your sister like this. Before his foot even hit the top step of the office, David moved. He stepped squarely between me and my father, placing a massive hand directly on my father's chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. Two other security guards dressed in tactical gear instantly materialized from behind the office trailers, flanking David with their hands resting firmly on their utility belts. Step back, sir, David ordered, his voice completely devoid of emotion, but carrying a lethal warning. You are trespassing on private property. If you take one more step toward Ms. Simone, I will forcibly restrain you and have you arrested for assault. My father froze, his eyes wide, as he looked at the three massive security guards towering over him. He had spent his entire life bullying his wife and his daughters, but he had absolutely no courage when faced with actual physical consequences. He slowly lowered his hand, taking a step back into the mud. Escort these people off my sight. David, I instructed, turning my back on my family. If they refuse to leave, call the police and press charges for criminal trespassing. If they ever show up at this gate again, do not even bother talking to them. Just call the authorities immediately. Understood, boss, David said. He gestured toward the gate with his thumb. All right, folks. Party is over. Back to your vehicle right now. Let us go move it. Spencer tried to stand his ground, puffing out his chest. Do not touch me. I know my rights. He spat, adjusting his suit jacket. We are leaving. But this is not over, Simone. You hear me? I will destroy your reputation. The security guards formed a wall and began aggressively walking them backward toward the exit. Brianna suddenly stopped crying. The desperate sister act completely vanished. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her latest iPhone. She held it up, pointing the camera directly at me and the security guards. She expertly pressed a button and instantly contorted her face into a mask of pure agony, forcing fresh tears to stream down her perfectly contoured cheeks. She hit record and began sobbing dramatically for the camera. "Please, someone help us!" she wailed into the microphone, walking backward toward the car. "My sister Simone is having us violently thrown off our own family property. We just came to ask for help because we are struggling, and she sent armed thugs to attack my elderly parents. Please, share this video." She stole our inheritance. I watched her perform her ridiculous digital theater completely unbothered. They were walking right into a trap they could not even comprehend. Let them post their videos. Let them cry to their church friends. Because they had no idea that my final devastating move was already in motion, and Spencer was about to lose a lot more than just a foreclosure on his house. By the time the sun set that evening, Brianna had already edited and uploaded her little performance to every social media platform she could access. The video was a masterclass in manipulation. She had completely cut out the part where my father tried to physically attack me and where Spencer threatened to destroy my reputation. Instead, the clip only showed her standing in the mud, tears streaming down her face, while my heavily armed security team marched her elderly parents backward toward the exit. Within hours, the video had gone viral within our local Atlanta community, especially among the congregation of our family church. My phone began ringing incessantly with calls and text messages from aunts, uncles, and church elders I had not spoken to in years. They called me a disgrace, a greedy monster, and a terrible daughter. Pastor Miller even left a deeply disappointed voicemail suggesting I needed spiritual counseling to cleanse my heart of such unnatural greed. I did not answer a single call. I simply muted my phone, poured myself a glass of red wine, and continued reviewing the structural blueprints for the logistics hub. Public opinion did not pay my contractors, and church gossip did not lay concrete. But the next morning, the real consequences of Spencer's arrogant threats began to materialize. I was sitting in my downtown corporate office, going over the quarterly budget, when my direct line rang. It was Richard, the senior loan officer at the commercial bank, funding my $30 million construction project. "Simone, we have a serious problem," Richard said, his voice tight with professional anxiety. "Our risk management department just flagged your portfolio. We received a formal notice of pending litigation from a corporate law firm representing your father, Thomas, and your brother-in-law, Spencer. They are claiming fraudulent transfer of deed and demanding an immediate injunction on all construction activities." I leaned back in my leather chair, staring out the window at the Atlanta skyline. "So Spencer actually found a lawyer desperate enough to take the case?" I asked, keeping my tone completely level. "It is worse than that." Richard sighed. "Spencer used his position at his financial firm to back-channel the complaint. He essentially threatened that his firm would pull their institutional investments from our bank if we continued funding a contested asset." My hands are tied. "Simone, until this legal dispute is resolved, the bank is freezing your credit line. You have enough capital to keep the site running for maybe 2 weeks, but after that we cannot disperse the next phase of funds." I thanked Richard and hung up the phone. Spencer thought he had me cornered. He thought that by cutting off my oxygen I would suffocate and crawl back to them begging for a deal. He was about to learn that I did not just build buildings, I built traps. Before I could even formulate my next move, my office receptionist buzzed my intercom. "Ms. Simone," she said, her voice laced with confusion and a hint of panic. "Your family is here in the lobby. They are causing quite a scene. They bypassed my security at the construction site, so they decided to ambush me at my corporate headquarters." I walked out of my private office and stood at the glass double doors of the reception area. There they were standing in the middle of the sleek marble lobby. My father was wearing a sharp suit, looking around at the expensive modern decor. With a mixture of intimidation and intense greed, Brianna was clinging to Spencer's arm, wearing dark sunglasses indoors to hide her supposedly tear-swollen eyes. But it was my mother Denise who was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She was clutching the edge of the receptionist's desk, her voice trembling loud enough for all my employees to hear. "We just want to see our daughter," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "We have not slept all night. She is hiding our ancestral assets and letting us face financial ruin while she sits up here in this glass tower. Please just tell her that her mother is begging for 5 minutes of her time." My receptionist looked completely mortified, unsure of how to handle the hysterical elderly woman. I pushed open the glass doors and the lobby instantly fell silent. Save the tears. "Denise," I said, my voice echoing off the marble floors, "you are wasting your performance on people who do not care. Get inside the conference room right now before I have building security drag you out by your designer coats." They immediately dropped the victim act and marched into the large glass-walled conference room. I followed them in, closing the heavy door to block out the stares of my staff. I did not offer them a seat. I stood at the head of the long mahogany table, crossing my arms. "You have exactly 3 minutes," I stated coldly. "Speak." My mother instantly slipped back into her gentle, heartbroken mother persona. She reached across the table, attempting to grab my hand, but I pulled it away. "Simone, how could you be so cruel?" she whispered, her voice dripping with fake sorrow. "You hid the true value of that land from us. That property belonged to Aunt Ruby. It is family legacy. You knew your sister was struggling to make ends meet, and you selfishly kept millions of dollars a secret. We raised you to share your blessings, not to hoard them like a villain." I stared at her, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, hollow disgust. "3 years ago, you called that family legacy a pile of garbage," I reminded her. "You threw it at me like a dog bone because you did not want to pay the taxes. Do not stand in my office and lecture me about cruelty when you literally handed me a debt and laughed." My father slammed his hand down on the mahogany table. "Enough of the past," he barked, trying to regain control of the room. "We are here to talk about the present. Spencer's lawyers have already contacted your bank. We know your funds are frozen, you cannot pay your contractors, and your entire project is going to collapse by the end of the month." Brianna stepped forward, pulling off her sunglasses to reveal eyes that were completely dry. "It does not have to be this way, Simone," she said, using a condescending tone that made my blood boil. "We are family, and family is supposed to support each other when things get tough. Spencer and I are facing foreclosure and you have an empire. It is only fair that we split it." She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a thick legal document, slapping it down on the table. "We are willing to be reasonable," she continued. "Sign over a 50% equity stake in the commercial plaza to me and Spencer. We will drop the lawsuit. We will call the bank and unfreeze your funds. We will even release a public statement to the church saying it was all a big misunderstanding, so your reputation is restored." I looked down at the contract. It was the most shameless, arrogant demand I had ever seen in my entire life. They had thrown me out like trash, and now they wanted half of the kingdom. I built from the dirt. I reached out, picked up the legal document, and calmly tore it straight down the middle. I let the two halves flutter to the floor. "Absolutely not," I said, staring dead into Brianna's eyes. "You are not getting 50%. You are not getting 5%. You are not getting a single dime from my sweat and blood. Go ahead and lose your house, Brianna. Go ahead and declare bankruptcy. I will gladly send you a cardboard box to sleep in." Spencer's face turned a deep shade of crimson. The polite professional mask completely vanished. He stepped up to the table, towering over the torn pieces of paper. He reached up and slowly adjusted his silk tie, a predatory glint in his pale blue eyes. "You think you are so smart, Simone," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think tearing up a piece of paper makes you powerful. I just froze a $30 million credit line with one phone call. I work with the biggest financial sharks in this city. You are just a local developer playing in a sandbox. If you do not sign over half of that equity by tomorrow morning, I am going to make sure your project is permanently shut down. I will drag this out in court until you are completely bankrupt, and then I will buy that land at auction for pennies on the dollar. I will take it all anyway. He leaned closer, planting his palms on the table. So what is it going to be? Simone? Are you going to be smart and give your family what they deserve? Or are you going to lose everything you have ever worked for? I did not flinch. I did not back away. I simply smiled. It was a smile so chilling and so confident that Spencer's arrogant expression faltered for a fraction of a second. I am going to destroy you, Spencer, I whispered back. You just brought a lawsuit to a gunfight, and you have absolutely no idea who actually owns the company you work for. Spencer stared at me for a long, heavy moment before a loud, forced laugh erupted from his chest. It was a hollow, nervous sound, but he quickly masked it with the practiced arrogance of a man who had spent his entire career failing upward. He shook his head, adjusting his expensive silk tie as if trying to physically brush off my warning. You are bluffing, Simone, he said, his voice dripping with that signature Wall Street condescension. You think throwing around vague corporate threats is going to scare me? I am a senior director at a global equity firm. You are just a local developer who got incredibly lucky with a municipal zoning change. He placed both of his hands flat on the mahogany table, leaning his weight forward to try and physically intimidate me. Let us talk about your reality, Simone, he sneered. I have seen the public filings for your LLC. I know exactly what your capital stack looks like. You are highly leveraged, and your debt-to-equity ratio is a ticking time bomb. If my legal team files a formal injunction citing title fraud, it will immediately trigger a material adverse change clause in your loan covenants. Your mezzanine financing will evaporate, your senior lenders will call in the debt, you will be in default before the weekend is over. He stood up straight, puffing out his chest, looking around the room as if he had just delivered a fatal blow in a boardroom battle. You do not have the liquidity to fight a protracted legal war against institutional investors. He continued, his tone turning mockingly sympathetic. You are just a single black woman playing a high-stakes game completely on her own. The old boys' club of real estate and finance will eat you alive the second you show weakness. So stop pretending you have some secret leverage over my firm, and sign the damn papers before I personally ensure your company is liquidated. I looked past Spencer and focused on my parents. My father Thomas was nodding along to Spencer's financial jargon. Even though I knew for a fact he did not understand a single word of it, he was just blindly following the confident white man in the tailored suit, believing that proximity to Spencer's perceived power elevated his own status. My mother, Denise, stood quietly behind them, her face an absolute mask of entitlement. They were perfectly willing to stand there and watch this arrogant, mediocre man threaten their daughter's livelihood and insult her intelligence. They were not my family. They were just parasites looking for a new host. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue about loan covenants or liquidity ratios. I simply reached under the edge of the conference table and pressed the silent security button wired directly to the building lobby. Spencer, you have built your entire identity on the illusion of power, I said, my voice completely calm and devoid of emotion. But the difference between you and me is that you work for a paycheck. I own the building. Before Spencer could formulate another arrogant response, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. Terrence, my head of corporate security, stepped into the room, followed by 3 other heavily muscled guards dressed in immaculate dark suits. Terrence was a towering figure, a former defensive tackle who ran my security detail with military precision. You rang. Miss Simone. Terrence asked, his deep voice rumbling through the tense room. Yes, Terrence, I replied, keeping my eyes locked on Spencer. This meeting is over. These individuals are trespassing on corporate property. Please escort them out of the building immediately. If they resist or raise their voices, feel free to physically remove them. My father immediately bristled his pride. instantly wounded by the presence of the security team. "Now hold on just a minute, Simone," he barked, trying to use his booming dad voice. "You cannot throw us out like common criminals. We are your parents. I am your father, and I demand respect." Terrence did not even wait for my command. He stepped squarely in front of my father, completely blocking his view of me. "Sir, it is time to leave." Terrence set his tone polite, but leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Step toward the elevator. Right now." Spencer tried to intervene, grabbing his ripped contract from the floor and pointing a finger at my security chief. "Do not touch him," Spencer ordered, trying to assert his fake dominance. "We are in the middle of a legal negotiation. You lay a hand on me or my family, and I will sue this entire company for assault. I will have your badge and your job by the end of the day." Terrence looked down at Spencer with an expression of sheer boredom. "I do not wear a badge, sir," Terrence replied deadpan. "I wear a tailored suit, paid for by Ms. Simone. Now walk." When Spencer refused to move stubbornly, planting his feet, Terrence simply nodded to the other guards. In one swift, coordinated movement, two guards stepped forward and firmly grabbed Spencer by his upper arms. They did not strike him, but their grip was like a steel vise, completely immobilizing him. Spencer's eyes went wide with shock as his feet were practically lifted off the expensive carpet. "Hey, get your hands off me!" he yelled, his polished Wall Street persona instantly crumbling into sheer panic. I said, "Let me go. Do you know who I am?" Brianna let out a dramatic shriek, grabbing onto Spencer's sleeve as the guards began marching him toward the glass doors. "Simone, call them off!" she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly in the confined space. "This is illegal. You are a monster!" My mother gasped, clutching her chest as if she were about to faint, while my father furiously muttered under his breath, pacing backward toward the exit to avoid being grabbed. Himself, I stood at the head of the table and watched the entire spectacle with absolute cold satisfaction. The walk of shame through my corporate headquarters was a masterpiece. My employees stood at their glass-walled cubicles and offices watching in stunned silence as the arrogant finance broker who had marched in demanding millions was now being forcefully dragged out by his elbows. Spencer kicked and struggled, his face turning a vibrant shade of purple, his expensive silk tie flying wildly over his shoulder. He shouted threats about lawsuits, SEC investigations, and ruining my life. But his words were completely muffled by the sheer humiliation of his physical removal. Brianna stumbled in her designer heels, trying to keep up with the guards, while my parents followed closely behind, heads bowed in absolute disgrace. They were paraded through the pristine marble lobby, past the front reception desk, and directly toward the heavy revolving glass doors. Terrence and his team pushed them through the exit. They stumbled out onto the blazing hot Atlanta pavement, the sudden blast of city heat and exhaust fumes hitting them. Immediately, Spencer lost his footing and tripped over the curb, landing hard on his hands and knees, right in front of a busy downtown intersection. His tailored suit pants tore at the knee, and the contents of his leather briefcase spilled out onto the dirty concrete. My father rushed forward to help him up, looking around frantically to see if anyone in the bustling business district was watching them. They had come to my ivory tower expecting to conquer me, and instead they had been literally tossed into the gutter. I stood behind the tinted glass of the lobby window, entirely out of their sight, watching their pathetic scramble. Spencer was red-faced and hyperventilating furiously, brushing the city grime off his ruined suit while screaming curses at the glass doors. But Brianna was not helping her husband. She was not checking on our elderly parents. Instead, she reached into her luxury handbag with trembling fingers and pulled out her smartphone. She quickly checked her reflection in. The dark screen messed up her hair just enough to look appropriately distressed and pinched the bridge of her nose to force fresh tears into her eyes. I watched as she extended her arm, framing the towering corporate skyscraper and her ruined husband in the background. She hit a button on the screen, and I knew exactly what she was doing. She was going live. She was taking her pathetic digital war to the next level, broadcasting her fake victimhood directly from the downtown pavement. She opened her mouth and began sobbing into the camera, playing the role of the innocent sister, assaulted by corporate thugs. Let her cry, I thought to myself, turning away from the window and walking back toward the elevators. Let her paint me as the villain to all her followers, because when the actual truth dropped, it was going to hit them harder than the concrete they were standing on. By the time I woke up the next morning, Brianna had managed to turn her pavement tantrum into a full-blown digital crusade. The video she recorded outside my corporate headquarters spread through our Atlanta circles like wildfire. She had added a tragic instrumental track in the background and placed bold text across the screen, calling me a corporate monster. She spun a fabricated tale about how I had maliciously tricked our elderly parents into signing away their ancestral land. She looked directly into the camera with those fake tears and claimed that she simply went to my office to ask for a small loan to save her house from foreclosure, and in response, I hired armed thugs to physically assault her and our parents. My mother Denise wasted no time capitalizing on this performance. She took to Facebook and wrote a massive essay about the agonizing pain of raising a child with a heart of stone. She quoted Bible verses about greed and betrayal, painting herself as a heartbroken martyr who had sacrificed her entire life only to be stabbed in the back by her own flesh and blood. My father, Thomas, played his part perfectly as well, sharing the post and adding comments about how he had failed as the protector of the family legacy, and how the devil had corrupted my soul with the love of money. They were conducting a masterclass in gaslighting on a public stage, and the audience ate up every single word. The backlash from our local community was swift and ruthless. These were the same church elders, family friends, and neighbors who had watched me grow up. They were the people who knew exactly how hard I worked to build my career. While Brianna was handed everything on a silver platter. But in our affluent Black community, appearances were absolutely everything. Because Brianna and Spencer presented the image of a wealthy, perfect Christian couple sitting in the front pew. Every Sunday, they were instantly believed. I became the ultimate villain overnight. My phone was flooded with hostile text messages and voicemails from aunts, uncles, and cousins demanding I repent and give my sister her rightful share of the inheritance. They called me a wicked daughter, an ungrateful wretch, and a disgrace to the family name. When I stopped by my usual bakery near the church neighborhood to grab a morning pastry, the owner who had known me for 20 years refused to make eye contact. She slid my coffee across the counter with a look of absolute disgust and muttered that I should be ashamed of myself for putting my parents out on the street. It was a profound and isolating betrayal. But I did not break. I did not post a tearful rebuttal video online. I did not write a long emotional status update to defend my character or explain the truth. When you are a Black woman navigating the cutthroat male-dominated world of commercial real estate, you learn very early on that society will not give you the benefit of the doubt. You do not get the luxury of falling apart in public or screaming about how unfair the world is. If I showed anger, they would label me as the bitter, aggressive Black woman. If I showed sadness, they would twist it into a confession of guilt. So I chose absolute stony silence. I let them scream into the digital void and gather their fake sympathy while I focused entirely on the tangible reality of my empire. Public opinion does not pour concrete, and Facebook likes do not pay off commercial loans. I locked myself inside my office and surrounded myself with hard, irrefutable evidence. I reviewed every single clause in the unconditional waiver of liability my parents had signed 3 years ago. I double-checked the environmental surveys, the municipal zoning permits, and the tax records I had paid off. Everything was completely ironclad and legally bulletproof. But more importantly, I spent hours reviewing the corporate hierarchy of the institutional investment firm where Spencer worked. I mapped out the exact chain of command, tracing his position as a mid-level regional broker, all the way up to the executive board of his parent company. I read commercial lease agreements of their downtown Atlanta office space and reviewed their corporate code of conduct. I was quietly organizing my ammunition, making sure that when I finally fired back, there would be absolutely zero collateral damage on my end, and maximum devastation on theirs. For 3 days, the public smear campaign raged on outside my walls while I sat in the eye of the storm, perfectly calm. I was reviewing the steel shipment schedule for the east wing of the commercial plaza, feeling completely in control of the situation. But my family was toxic. And toxic. People are like a virus that always finds a way to seep into the tiny cracks of your foundation. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, just as the rain started pouring down over the city. The heavy mahogany door to my private office suddenly flew open without a knock. My executive assistant Maya rushed into the room, her face completely drained of color. She was a sharp, capable professional who never panicked, but right now, she was clutching a yellow legal pad, and her hands were visibly shaking. "Simone, we have a massive emergency," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath as she closed the door behind her. I stood up from my desk, my instincts instantly screaming that Spencer had actually managed to execute his cowardly threat. "What is it, Maya?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. She looked at me with sheer terror in her eyes, knowing exactly what this news meant for our company. "I just got off the phone with the senior underwriters at the commercial bank," she stammered, dropping the legal pad onto my desk. "The bank is officially freezing our accounts, Simone. They saw the viral video your sister posted, and this morning they received the formal notice of pending litigation from Spencer's corporate lawyers. The compliance department convened an emergency meeting and deemed our project a high-risk public relations liability." Maya took a shaky breath, pointing at the notes on the pad. "They are temporarily halting the disbursement of the Phase 2 construction funds. They refuse to release another dollar until the title dispute is completely resolved in a court of law." The silence in the room was deafening. I looked out the window, watching the rain hit the glass, realizing the sheer magnitude of what my family had just done. "If we do not get that capital by Monday morning," Maya whispered, her voice breaking, "the contractors will walk off the site, the suppliers will cancel our material orders, and the entire project will collapse into default." I looked at Maya as the weight of her words settled into the quiet space of my office. The rain continued to beat against the large glass windows, sounding like a ticking clock counting down the final hours of my empire. "Thank you, Maya," I said, my voice remaining completely steady, despite the absolute chaos erupting in my mind. "Do not tell anyone else in the office about this yet. Keep the staff focused on their daily tasks and let me handle the bank." Maya nodded, swallowing hard before she turned and quietly left the room, closing the heavy door behind her. I sat alone at my desk, taking a deep breath to center myself. Spencer had actually done it. He had used his firm as a weapon, leveraging their massive institutional portfolios to intimidate my regional commercial bank. The bank officers were cowards who cared more about keeping a Wall Street investment firm happy than honoring a legally binding construction loan with a local developer. They were terrified of the negative public relations from Brianna's viral video, and the frivolous lawsuit was the perfect excuse for them to freeze my accounts and protect their own interests. By Friday morning, the reality of the frozen funds hit the construction site with devastating force. My phone began ringing off the hook with calls from panicked project managers and angry vendors. "Greg," my lead site foreman, called me from the muddy plaza grounds, his voice tight with frustration over the loud sounds of heavy machinery. "Simone, the wire transfer for the structural steel delivery just bounced," Greg reported. "The supplier is refusing to unload the trucks until they see the cash clear their accounts. And that is not even the worst part. The union representatives for the electrical and plumbing crews just walked into my trailer. They heard rumors that the project funding was frozen, and they are threatening to pull all their men off the site by Monday morning if payroll is not fully guaranteed. If the workers walked off the job, the entire timeline would be destroyed. A strike would trigger penalty clauses in my contracts with future retail tenants, and the city would revoke my temporary zoning permits due to project abandonment." Spencer knew exactly what he was doing. He was systematically choking the life out of my business, knowing that time was the one thing I could not afford to lose. As I was staring at the spreadsheet of unpaid invoices trying to calculate how many days I could keep the site running on my personal savings, my private cell phone lit up. The caller ID flashed with my mother. Denise's name. I knew exactly why she was calling. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear without saying a word. Simone, honey, is that you? My mother asked, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet fake sympathy. I did not answer, waiting for her to drop the act. Spencer just told us the terrible news about your little project. Denise continued, letting out a dramatic theatrical sigh. He said your bank cut you off and your construction site is about to be completely shut down. We are all just so worried about you. The sheer audacity of her call was almost breathtaking. She was calling to gloat over the financial ruin she and her golden son-in-law had orchestrated. I know you are probably panicking right now, but you need to listen to reason, my mother said, her tone shifting from fake sympathy to condescending authority. This is exactly what happens when you try to bite off more than you can chew. Real estate and high finance are cutthroat businesses, Simone. It is simply too much stress for a single woman to handle all by herself. You do not have the temperament or the connections for this kind of high-level corporate warfare. I gripped the edge of my mahogany desk, my knuckles turning white. Just swallow your pride and do the right thing, Denise urged, her voice echoing in the quiet office. Hand the deed over to your brother-in-law. Spencer is a professional finance director. He knows how to talk to the bankers and he can fix this entire mess by the end of the day. Let the men handle the big business. Simone, sign the equity over to Brianna and Spencer before you lose absolutely everything and end up bankrupt. The absolute misogyny and toxic manipulation in her voice made my blood run ice cold. My own mother was using my gender and my single status as weapons to gaslight me into surrendering my life's work to a mediocre white man who was currently drowning in his own debt. She actually believed that because I was a black woman, I would eventually crack under the pressure and submit to the nearest male authority figure. You are right about one thing, Denise, I said, my voice dangerously calm. This is a cutthroat business, and you are about to find out exactly how deep the cuts go. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto my desk. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of despair. The brief moment of panic I felt earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by a burning razor-sharp focus. Spencer had thrown his best punch, and he foolishly assumed I was going to stay down on the mat. He thought my power ended at the boundaries of my construction site. I walked over to the executive closet in the corner of my private office. I reached past the casual blouses and everyday workwear and pulled out my armor. It was a pristine, perfectly tailored black designer suit. I slipped on the matching blazer, adjusted the sharp lapels, and stepped into a pair of black leather stilettos. I checked my reflection in the full-length mirror. Staring back at me was not the helpless victim my family desperately wanted me to be. Staring back at me was the owner of a $30 million commercial plaza. A woman who had clawed her way to the top of the Atlanta real estate market through sheer brilliance and relentless grit. I grabbed my sleek leather briefcase and placed the original copies of my land deed, the bank loan covenants, and a very special corporate dossier inside. I walked out of my office and approached Maya's desk. Cancel every single meeting I have for the rest of the afternoon, I instructed my assistant, and Maya, call Greg at the site. Tell him to assure the union reps that payroll will be cleared by Monday morning. Tell the suppliers to park their trucks and wait. No one is walking off my site. Maya looked up at me, her eyes widening as she took in my sharp appearance and the absolute cold determination in my voice. Where are you going, Simone? She asked. I am going to fix this, I replied without breaking stride. I walked out of my corporate headquarters and took the private elevator down to the underground parking garage. I got into my sleek black car, gripped the leather steering wheel, and pulled out into the pouring Atlanta rain. I was not driving to the local bank to beg a cowardly loan officer for an extension. I was not driving to Spencer's leased house in Buckhead to negotiate a settlement with my toxic family. I merged onto the highway, heading straight for the towering skyscrapers of the downtown financial district. I was driving directly to the global headquarters of the massive institutional investment group that owned Spencer's entire firm. He wanted to play corporate warfare and use his boss's money to bully me. I was going to walk right into his parent company and show the real sharks exactly what kind of liability Spencer had become. The towering glass structure in glass of Sterling Global Enterprises pierced the gray rain clouds over downtown Atlanta. I handed my car keys to the valet and walked through the revolving doors with the absolute certainty of a woman who held all the winning cards. Sterling Global was not just a massive financial conglomerate. They were the parent company that owned the international retail chain, slated to be the anchor tenant of my commercial plaza. And more importantly, they were the umbrella corporation that controlled the boutique equity firm, where my brother-in-law Spencer played at being a powerful executive. I did not have an appointment, but when you are the sole developer building a flagship regional hub for a billionaire, CEO doors tend to open very quickly. Within 15 minutes of speaking to the executive receptionist, I was escorted to the top floor and ushered into a sprawling corner office overlooking the entire city. Sitting behind a massive mahogany desk was Harrison Cole, the chief executive officer of Sterling Global. He was a sharp, silver-haired titan of industry who valued efficiency and profit above absolutely everything else. Simone, he said, standing up to button his suit jacket as I walked in. This is an unexpected surprise. My development team tells me your site progress is 3 weeks ahead of schedule. So what brings you to my office on a rainy Friday afternoon? I took a seat in the leather chair opposite his desk and placed my sleek briefcase on my lap. We have a slight complication, Harrison, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and strictly professional. The regional bank funding my construction loan just froze my accounts this morning. They are halting the Phase 2 disbursement, which means my contractors will walk off the site by Monday, and your flagship retail location will be severely delayed. Harrison's welcoming smile instantly vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating glare of a corporate predator. Why would they freeze a fully secured loan, he demanded. Because they received a formal notice of pending litigation regarding the title of the land, I explained. It is a completely frivolous lawsuit filed by my estranged family, but the bank is acting cowardly. They are terrified of the legal exposure because the person who filed the complaint used his position at a major financial firm to threaten them. He told the bank that his firm would pull all their institutional investments if they continued funding my project. Harrison leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. That is financial blackmail, Simone. Who exactly is threatening your bank and jeopardizing my retail hub? I opened my briefcase and pulled out the corporate dossier I had compiled. I slid it across the smooth surface of the desk, right into his hands. The man organizing this sabotage is a mid-level regional broker named Spencer, I stated calmly. He is my brother-in-law, and he is currently drowning in personal debt. He filed this baseless lawsuit to extort millions of dollars from my company. But here is the interesting part. Harrison Spencer works for your financial subsidiary. He is actively weaponizing the Sterling Global name and leveraging your institutional portfolios to settle a personal family vendetta. Harrison opened the folder, and his eyes scanned the documents. I watched the color drain from his face as the reality of the situation set in. A low-level employee in one of his branch offices was engaging in rogue extortion, threatening a $30 million development where his own parent company was the primary tenant. Spencer was essentially using Harrison's money to destroy Harrison's own investment. This is absolutely unacceptable. Harrison growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. This broker is exposing my entire corporation to massive legal liability. I will have him terminated and escorted out of his building before the hour is over. I will personally call your bank and clear this up. I held up a hand, stopping him before he could pick up his desk phone. Do not call my bank. Harrison, I do not want to do business with cowards who freeze my assets at the first sign of trouble. I came here with a different proposal. Harrison paused, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and deep respect. I am listening, he said. Sterling Global has a massive private equity division. I continued, leaning forward to match his intense energy. Buy out my construction loan from the regional bank today. Become my direct lender. You already have a vested interest in this plaza, succeeding because your retail stores need this location to dominate the regional market. By funding me directly, you cut out the cowardly middlemen. I will give Sterling Global a slightly higher interest return on the debt, and I will grant you exclusive naming rights to the main pavilion. It is a guaranteed return on your investment, and it keeps the entire project completely in-house. Harrison stared at me for a long, silent moment. He was running the numbers in his head, calculating the risk, the timeline, and the massive financial upside. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He closed the dossier and tossed it onto his desk. You are a shark, Simone, he said, shaking his head in sheer admiration. You walk in here, tell me my own employee is sabotaging my project, and then use that exact leverage to secure direct institutional financing. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. Get the chief financial officer and our lead legal counsel in here immediately. Harrison ordered his assistant. Tell them we are drafting a loan buyout agreement for the Plaza project, and we are wiring funds by the end of the day. I stood up and extended my hand across the desk. Harrison stood and shook it firmly, sealing the deal that just saved my entire empire. And about your rogue employee? Spencer, Harrison added, his eyes narrowing with corporate ruthlessness. Leave him to me. I am going to make an example out of him that this financial district will never forget. I thanked Harrison and walked out of the skyscraper, feeling like a completely new woman. The rain had finally stopped, and the Atlanta sun was beginning to break through the heavy gray clouds. I got back into my car and drove straight to my construction site. The muddy grounds were bustling with activity, the giant cranes swinging steel beams high into the air. The union workers were busy, the cement trucks were rolling, and my project was completely untouchable. I parked my car and walked toward my makeshift site office, taking a deep breath of the fresh, wet air. My security chief, David, was waiting for me at the bottom of the metal stairs. He had a strange expression on his face, and he was holding a thick manila envelope. What is the situation, David? I asked, adjusting my blazer. A process server showed up at the front gate about 20 minutes ago, boss, David said, handing me the heavy envelope. He insisted on leaving this for you. It is official, legal documentation. I took the envelope and looked at the return address printed in bold black ink. It was from the downtown corporate law firm that Spencer had hired. I slid my finger under the flap and pulled out the thick stack of papers. It was the official summons and complaint. My father, Thomas, and my brother-in-law, Spencer, were officially suing me for fraud, deceptive business practices, and demanding an immediate injunction to seize my property. They had actually pulled the trigger. They had officially taken their greedy extortion attempt into the realm of a documented legal battle. I looked down at the court summons, and a slow, dark smile spread across my face. They thought this piece of paper was my death warrant. They thought they had me backed into a corner, terrified and broke. They had absolutely no idea that I had just secured unlimited backing from the biggest financial titan in the city, and that Spencer had just destroyed his own career. I tapped the thick legal document against the palm of my hand. Let us go to court, I whispered to myself. The trap was fully set, and it was time to let them walk right into their own destruction. I sat at my desk and slowly turned the pages of the official court summons, reading through the ridiculous allegations my family had actually managed to put into print. The legal jargon was thick and intentionally convoluted, but the core premise of their lawsuit was hilariously thin and entirely built on absolute lies. Spencer and his rented corporate attorneys were claiming that I had used undue influence and deceptive business practices to trick my parents into signing away the deed. They alleged that I had illegally hidden the municipal zoning plans from my own family and caused them severe emotional and financial distress. According to the paperwork, they were demanding an immediate halt to all construction on the site, a full audit of my LLC, and a mandatory transfer of 50% of all current and future assets to Brianna. It was a masterclass in sheer audacity, but from a purely legal standpoint, it was a desperate fishing expedition. They had absolutely no concrete evidence of fraud, because no fraud had ever taken place. They were simply hoping that the threat of a prolonged, expensive legal battle would terrify me into a quick settlement. The ink on the summons was barely dry when my private cell phone began to vibrate across my desk. The caller ID flashed with my father. Thomas' name. He had timed his phone call perfectly, waiting just long enough for the process server to hand me the envelope before swooping in to play the role of the merciful patriarch. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, remaining completely silent. "You got the papers, Simone?" Thomas stated, his voice booming with a sickening level of forced authority. "Yes, Thomas. I received your little delivery," I replied, leaning back in my leather chair. "I hope you are not paying those lawyers by the hour, because this complaint is completely baseless. Do not play tough with me." "Little girl?" My father snapped his patience instantly, wearing thin. "Spencer does not play around, and his legal team is top tier. They already froze your bank accounts, and by Monday they will have a judge sign an injunction that locks the gates of your construction site. You are bleeding cash, Simone, and you do not have the stamina to survive a corporate war of attrition." I kept my breathing steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing even a hint of stress in my voice. "So what exactly is the purpose of this phone call, Thomas? If you are so confident in your legal strategy, then I will simply see you in court." "We do not want to destroy you, Simone," my father said, shifting his tone to sound like a reasonable peacemaker. "We are a family, and we do not want to drag our own flesh and blood through the mud in a public civil court. You know exactly how the media and the legal system look at wealthy black families when we start tearing each other apart over money. Do not embarrass our community like this, Simone. Do not be the reason our family name becomes a local scandal." I almost laughed out loud at his blatant manipulation. He was actually trying to use my race and our standing in the local black community as a weapon to guilt-trip me into surrendering my empire. He was perfectly fine with throwing me away 3 years ago to protect his own credit score, but now he suddenly cared about the optics of family unity. "We are willing to offer you a way out," Thomas continued, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Spencer and Brianna are reasonable people. They do not want to take everything from you, even though they easily could. Just wire $2 million to Spencer's account by the end of the week. A simple, clean settlement. If you pay the $2 million, I will personally make sure." Spencer drops the lawsuit and calls off the bank. "You can keep playing real estate developer, and we can all move on with our lives." There it was. The grand extortion plot fully revealed in all its pathetic glory. Spencer knew his lawsuit was garbage, and he knew he could never actually win a trial based on the ironclad waiver they had signed. He was just using his institutional leverage to hold my project hostage, hoping I would panic and hand over $2 million to save a $30 million investment. In a normal situation, a desperate local developer might actually consider paying the ransom just to unfreeze their credit line and keep their contractors working. But I was not desperate, and my credit line was no longer under Spencer's control. I let his ridiculous demand hang in the absolute silence of the room for several long seconds, letting him believe that I was actually sweating over the numbers. $2 million is a lot of money to transfer over a phone call. "Thomas," I finally said, my voice smooth and perfectly calculated. "If you want to talk about a financial settlement, we need to do this the right way." "Are you saying you will pay it?" my father asked, his voice spiking with naked, greedy excitement. "I am saying that I am ready to sit down and discuss the terms," I replied. "Set up a formal mediation meeting for Monday morning. Use the conference room at Spencer's fancy corporate law firm. Bring your wife, bring Brianna, bring Spencer, and bring every single piece of leverage you think you have against me. I will have my lawyer there, and we will settle this family dispute once and for all." "Excellent," Thomas said, practically out of breath with excitement. "Monday morning at 9 sharp. Do not be late, Simone. And do not try any tricks. He hung up the phone, already counting the imaginary millions he thought he had just bullied out of his daughter. I tossed my phone onto the desk and let out a deep, genuine laugh. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and greed that they could not see the massive shadow of the guillotine hanging directly over their heads. I spent the entire weekend in absolute silence, ignoring the continued barrage of hostile text messages from my extended family. I did not tell my parents about my private meeting with Harrison Cole. I let Spencer continue to believe that he was a terrifying corporate wolf hunting a defenseless sheep. Instead, I spent my Saturday morning sitting in the sleek modern office of my own attorney, Evelyn. Evelyn was a brilliant, ruthless black woman who had graduated at the top of her class from Harvard Law and specialized entirely in high-stakes commercial litigation. When I laid out the entire situation for her, including the signed waiver, the frozen bank accounts, and the new direct financing deal I had secured with Sterling Global, Evelyn just sat back in her chair and smiled a predatory smile. "They really handed you the murder weapon and asked you to pull the trigger," Evelyn said, organizing the documents into a sleek black folder. "We are going to legally and financially eviscerate them on Monday morning. Simone." By Sunday night, the trap was fully set. Every document was printed, every signature was verified, and every single countermeasure was locked and loaded. When Monday morning finally arrived, the Atlanta sky was bright and clear, a perfect day for a corporate execution. I dressed with absolute precision, wearing a tailored charcoal gray power suit that commanded respect. The second I walked into a room, my heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floors of the prestigious Buckhead skyscraper where Spencer's rented law firm was located. Evelyn walked right beside me, carrying the single black leather briefcase that held the absolute destruction of my toxic family. We bypassed the receptionist and were escorted directly down a long hallway, paneled in rich dark wood. The assistant opened the heavy glass doors to the primary conference room and stepped aside to let us enter. The room was massive with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of the wealthy Buckhead district. My parents and Brianna were already seated at the far end of the long mahogany table. They were dressed in their Sunday best, looking incredibly smug and completely relaxed. My mother was sipping a sparkling water, while my father casually checked his gold watch. Brianna was busy taking a selfie near the window, clearly ready to document her impending $2 million payday. They looked up as Evelyn and I walked in, but before anyone could say a single word, the heavy mahogany door opened again behind us. Spencer stepped into the room. He was wearing a brand new navy blue suit, his hair perfectly slicked back. He walked past me, completely ignoring my presence, and took his seat at the head of the table, right next to his high-priced corporate lawyer. Spencer leaned back in his leather chair, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and looked across the table at me. He flashed the bright, arrogant smile of a predator who truly believed he had just cornered his prey. Spencer leaned all the way back in his plush leather chair and casually hoisted his Italian leather shoes onto the polished mahogany table. It was a blatant display of disrespect, meant to establish his absolute dominance in the room. He adjusted his cuffs and flashed a brilliant, mocking smile at me and my attorney Evelyn. To my right, my parents and Brianna were putting on a pathetic fashion show. My mother had draped herself in an overly flashy faux fur coat, despite the warm Atlanta weather, while Brianna was sporting a handbag with a designer logo that was just slightly off-center. They were trying desperately to project an aura of generational wealth. But next to Evelyn and me in our understated bespoke tailoring, they just looked like cheap actors in a bad play. Spencer's hired corporate attorney, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat to begin the mediation, but Spencer immediately waved him off. "We do not need the legal preamble," Richard Spencer said, his eyes locked entirely on me. "We are all family here, right? We know exactly why we are sitting in this room." Spencer reached out and aggressively slid a thick, stapled document across the long table. It stopped right in front of my coffee cup. "That is the equity transfer agreement," he stated, tapping his watch impatiently. It grants Brianna and me a 50% ownership stake in the commercial plaza and gives me executive voting rights on all future construction decisions. I need you to sign on the dotted line, Simone. And I need you to do it quickly because I have a very important briefing with my CEO at Sterling Global in exactly 1 hour. And I do not want to be late. My father Thomas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and pointing a stern finger at me. Listen to the man. Simone. Thomas ordered, his voice echoing in the large glass room. He has you completely boxed in. Your bank accounts are frozen, and your construction site is bleeding money by the second. Stop acting like a stubborn child, and take the deal. We are actually doing you a favor by letting you keep half of the project, my mother. Denise nodded enthusiastically, adjusting her fake diamond necklace. Your father is absolutely right, honey, she chimed in, using that sickeningly sweet tone she always weaponized against me. You gave it a good try, but high-level real estate development is just too stressful for a single woman. You should be thanking Spencer for stepping in to save you from complete bankruptcy. Let the men handle the heavy lifting. Now be a good girl and sign the paper so we can all go grab a celebratory brunch. Brianna let out a loud, obnoxious laugh and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Yeah, hurry up, Simone, she snapped, rolling her eyes. Some of us actually have lives. I have a deep tissue massage booked for 11:30, and I am not missing it just because you want to throw a pity party over losing your little construction project. You played a dirty trick on mom and dad and you got caught. Just take your punishment and sign. Spencer took his feet off the table and leaned in, his predatory smile widening. You have absolutely zero leverage, Simone, he whispered, his voice dripping with venom. My firm controls your bank. If I do not make a phone call by noon to lift the freeze, your contractors are going to walk off the job and your loan will go into default. You will lose the land, you will lose the plaza, and you will be buried in so much debt you will never work in this city again. Pick up the pen and sign. The room fell completely silent. My family stared at me, waiting for the inevitable moment where the strong, independent black woman finally broke under their collective pressure. They expected tears. They expected begging. They expected me to grab the pen with shaking hands and surrender my entire life to them. Evelyn, my attorney, did not say a single word. She simply sat beside me, her hands folded neatly on the table, her face an unreadable mask of absolute professional calm. I looked down at the equity transfer agreement sitting in front of me. I looked at the cheap plastic pens Spencer had tossed on top of it. Then I reached out and picked up my porcelain coffee cup. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark roast coffee, savoring the rich, bitter taste while maintaining unbroken eye contact with Spencer. I gently placed the cup back onto its saucer without making a single sound. I reached down and brought my black leather briefcase onto my lap. The sharp click of the metal latches popping open echoed loudly in the tense silence of the conference room. I reached inside the briefcase, but I did not pull out a pen. I looked at Spencer, then at my parents, and finally at my sister Brianna. Who told you I came here to sign? I asked, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of fear. The silence that followed my question was incredibly thick and heavy. Spencer stopped smiling. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered across his face just seconds ago began to slowly melt into a look of genuine confusion. He glanced at his high-priced corporate attorney Richard, who simply shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair. I did not break eye contact with Spencer as my hand emerged from the black leather briefcase. I was not holding the cheap plastic pen he had tossed onto the table. Instead, I was holding a pristine, clear plastic sleeve. Inside that sleeve was a single sheet of paper that had been kept in a climate-controlled safe for the last 3 years. I placed the plastic sleeve flat on the mahogany table and used my index finger to slide it smoothly across the polished wood. It stopped right next to the ridiculous equity transfer agreement Spencer had drafted. Richard leaned forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, and picked up the plastic sleeve. I watched as his eyes scanned the header of the document. Within 3 seconds, the color completely drained from the lawyer's face. He swallowed hard, his professional composure shattering instantly as he read the legally binding text. "What is that?" Spencer snapped, leaning over to look at the paper. "What did you just give him?" My attorney Evelyn finally spoke. Her voice was smooth, elegant, and completely lethal. She sat up perfectly straight, folding her hands on the table and addressing the room with the commanding presence of a woman who had never lost a courtroom battle. "That, Spencer, is the original notarized copy of the unconditional waiver of liability and transfer of deed." Evelyn explained, her tone ringing with absolute authority. "It is the exact document your parents signed 3 years ago at the Thanksgiving dinner table. And if you look closely at the bottom right corner, you will see that Brianna also signed it as a legal witness." My mother Denise let out a sharp gasp, pressing her hand to her chest. My father Thomas suddenly looked incredibly pale, staring at the document as if it were a venomous snake resting on the table. Evelyn turned her sharp gaze directly to Richard. "As opposing counsel, I am sure you are well versed in Georgia state property law, Richard. So you already know that under the Georgia Code, a voluntary transfer of deed accompanied by an explicit assumption of debt is absolute and irreversible. My client Simone assumed a $5,000 tax lien that Thomas and Denise explicitly refused to pay. In exchange, they signed away any and all future claims to the property. They tricked us," Thomas shouted, suddenly slamming his fist against the table. "We did not know the land was going to be worth millions of dollars. She withheld commercial zoning information and manipulated her own family. That is fraud." Evelyn did not even blink at my father's outburst. She simply offered him a chilling, condescending smile. "Ignorance is not a legal defense," Thomas Evelyn replied smoothly. "You chose not to appraise the land because you were terrified of a minor tax debt. You chose to throw a financial burden onto your daughter to protect your own credit score. The document clearly states that you surrender all rights regardless of any future changes in zoning valuation or commercial development. You signed it of your own free will. There was no coercion, and there was certainly no fraud." Evelyn then turned her attention back to Spencer and his lawyer. "This lawsuit you filed is a textbook example of a frivolous bad faith claim. It is legally worthless. It is nothing more than expensive toilet paper. In fact, Richard, I am genuinely surprised you put your bar license on the line to file this garbage. If you do not withdraw this complaint by the end of the business day, I will personally file a motion for sanctions against your firm for malicious prosecution. I will also seek full compensation for all legal fees and punitive damages for corporate harassment." Richard wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He leaned in close to Spencer and whispered frantically in his ear. I could not hear the exact words, but the body language was unmistakable. The lawyer was telling his arrogant client that the case was completely dead on arrival and that they needed to retreat immediately. Brianna jumped up from her chair, her designer handbag sliding off her shoulder and hitting the floor. "You cannot do this to us!" Brianna screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "We are your family. We need that money, Simone. Spencer made terrible investments and our house is gone. You are sitting on $30 million and you owe us for everything Mom and Dad did for you." "I owe you absolutely nothing," I said, keeping my voice low and dangerously calm. 3 years ago, you laughed in my face while you cashed a $50,000 check. You sat there and let your husband mock me. You told me I was a failure. You made your choices, Brianna. Now you get to live with the consequences of your own greed." My mother began to cry loudly, covering her face with her hands. It was not the fake theatrical crying she had done for her viral internet video. This was the genuine, desperate sobbing of a woman who realized she had just lost her last chance at a massive payday. She realized that her golden child was broke, and the daughter she had thrown away was completely untouchable. Thomas slumped back in his chair, his chest heaving as the reality of the situation crushed his massive ego. He looked at Spencer, the white savior he had paraded around the church for years, and realized the man was nothing but a fraud in a tailored suit. But Spencer was not ready to surrender. His narcissism simply would not allow him to accept defeat in a room full of people he considered beneath him. He pushed his lawyer away, ignoring the frantic warnings Richard was whispering. Spencer placed both hands flat on the mahogany table and pushed himself up. He stood towering over the table, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure rage and desperation. He glared at me, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling beneath his expensive navy suit. "You think you are so incredibly smart, Simone?" Spencer sneered, his voice echoing loudly in the glass room. "You think a single piece of paper is going to save you?" He slammed his fist down on the table so hard that my porcelain coffee cup rattled against its saucer. "You are good, I will give you that," Spencer shouted, a mad, desperate glint in his eyes. "You brought a solid defense. But it does not matter. Your commercial project is still dead in the water, and your precious bank accounts are completely frozen." He pointed his finger right at my face, laughing a bitter, hollow laugh. "My firm still controls your regional bank, Simone. Your loan officers are terrified of my legal team. They are not going to release your Phase 2 construction funds today or tomorrow or next week. Your union workers are going to strike. Your suppliers are going to walk away. You might own the dirt, but you do not have the cash to build on it. You are going to go bankrupt, and I am going to stand by and watch your entire empire crumble into the mud." He stood there, chest puffed out, believing he still held the ultimate trump card. He believed that even if he could not steal my property, he could still use his institutional power to destroy it out of pure spite. I sat perfectly still, letting his frantic screaming wash over me. I did not flinch. I did not look at Evelyn for reassurance. I simply looked up at Spencer, absorbing his pathetic display of corporate bullying. I slowly shook my head, offering him a look of absolute profound pity. "Are you sure about that, Spencer?" I asked softly, my words slicing through the heavy tension in the room. "Are you sure about that?" "Spencer," I asked softly, my words slicing through the heavy tension in the room. I smiled at him, not a smile of joy, but the cold, clinical smile of an executioner. I reached into my black leather briefcase one more time and pulled out a thick red folder. I did not slide this one to his lawyer. I tossed it directly across the mahogany table so it landed right in front of my father. "Thomas." "What is this?" Thomas asked, his voice shaking slightly as he looked down at the bright red cover. "That is the real reason your brilliant son-in-law filed this ridiculous lawsuit," I said, leaning back in my chair and folding my hands. "That is a comprehensive financial investigation report compiled by one of the top private investigators in Atlanta. I suggest you open it." "Thomas." Spencer lunged forward, trying to grab the red folder before my father could reach it. "Do not touch that," Spencer yelled, panic completely replacing his arrogant tone. "It is illegal to investigate my personal finances." "Evelyn." My attorney simply cleared her throat. "Public records and court filings are available to anyone who knows where to look, Spencer," she stated calmly. "And right now, your public records are an absolute disaster." My father snatched the folder away from Spencer's, reaching hands and flipped it open. His eyes scanned the first page, and his jaw physically dropped. "Simone, what am I looking at?" Thomas whispered, his hands beginning to tremble. "You are looking at the truth," I replied, keeping my gaze fixed on Spencer, who was now sweating profusely. 3 years ago, you proudly handed this man a $50,000 check to put a down payment on a beautiful mansion in Buckhead. But Spencer never put that money into a house. He took your $50,000 and day traded it on unregulated cryptocurrency markets. He lost every single penny of your generous gift within the first 3 weeks of his marriage. Brianna let out a loud, tragic sob, burying her face in her hands. She was performing for a camera anymore. This was the raw, ugly reality she had been desperately trying to hide behind her designer handbags and leased luxury cars. "But how did they buy the house, my mother?" Denise asked, her voice barely a whisper as she stared at her golden son-in-law. "They did not buy it, Denise," I explained. "Spencer used his connections as a broker to secure a predatory adjustable-rate mortgage with zero money down. He leveraged himself to the absolute limit just to maintain the illusion of wealth for your church friends. While Brianna was busy posting pictures of her luxury lifestyle on the internet, Spencer was literally gambling their mortgage payments away on his phone. And now that the interest rates have adjusted, he has completely defaulted on the loan. Turn to page 4. Thomas. My father clumsily turned the pages, his breathing becoming heavy and labored. That is a copy of the active foreclosure notice, I said. The bank is seizing the Buckhead mansion at the end of this month. Spencer and Brianna are completely broke. They have maxed out every single credit card, and they are drowning in over $500,000 of toxic debt. Spencer stood frozen at the head of the table, his face completely drained of color. His corporate lawyer Richard was already packing his briefcase, quietly preparing to abandon a sinking ship. But I was not finished. I looked directly at my parents, watching their perfect suburban facade crumble into dust. But that is not the most interesting part of the report. I continued, my voice dropping lower. The most interesting part is on page 7. My father turned to page 7 and let out a sound that was half gasp and half choke. He dropped the folder onto the table as if it had physically burned his fingers. My mother leaned over to look at the paper, and her eyes widened in absolute sheer terror. "You thought you could keep a secret from me, Thomas?" I asked, shaking my head. "You thought you could hide the fact that 6 months ago, Spencer came crying to you for a bailout. He told you he just needed a little capital to win the money back and save the house. And because you were so terrified of the neighborhood gossip, you actually believed him." I stood up from my chair, placing my hands flat on the table and leaning toward my parents. "You secretly took out a second mortgage on your fully paid-off retirement home. You took the house you worked your entire lives to buy, and you handed the equity straight to a gambling addict in a tailored suit. And Spencer, being the brilliant financial mind that he is, took your retirement money and lost every single cent of it on the exact same crypto markets." The conference room felt like a graveyard. There was no yelling, there was no arrogant posturing, there was only the devastating, crushing weight of absolute financial ruin. My father looked at Spencer, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and pure murderous rage. Thomas had spent his entire life looking down on me, calling me a failure while he worshipped the ground. This white finance broker walked on. Now he was realizing that the golden child and the perfect son-in-law had just destroyed the entire family. "You told me it was a guaranteed return," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking as he stared at Spencer. "You looked me in the eye and swore on the Bible that you would pay us back with interest. We are 3 months behind on our own mortgage now, Spencer. The bank sent us a warning letter yesterday. We are going to lose our house." My mother, Denise, began to hyperventilate, clutching her chest as tears streamed down her perfectly powdered face. "Spencer, you promised us," she cried, her voice breaking. "You said Simone was the failure. You said you were going to take her plaza and make us all rich again." Spencer could not even look at them. He stared down at the polished mahogany table, his hands gripping the edge so tightly his knuckles were completely white. His entire existence had been exposed as a pathetic, hollow lie. He had filed this lawsuit as a desperate Hail Mary, hoping to extort $2 million from me to pay off his massive debts and save his own skin. He did not care if he destroyed my business. He did not care if he made my parents homeless. He only cared about maintaining his own arrogant illusion. I looked at the people who shared my blood. I looked at the mother who had thrown a tax debt in my face, and the father who had threatened to ruin my reputation. They were sitting there completely broken, facing the terrifying reality of becoming homeless in their golden years. And the saddest part was that I felt absolutely nothing for them. No sympathy, no guilt, just a cold, clinical closure. I picked up my coffee cup and took one final sip. "Well, Spencer," I said, breaking the heavy silence, "it looks like your grand extortion plan has completely failed. You are not getting my land. You are not getting a single dime of my equity. And you are certainly not getting $2 million to cover up your massive financial incompetence." Spencer slowly lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a desperate cornered fury. "You bitch!" he hissed, his voice trembling. "You think you have won? I still control your bank accounts. My firm will never release your funds. You are going down with us." "Simone," I smiled. It was a bright, genuine smile that reached all the way to my eyes. I slowly closed my black leather briefcase and fastened the metal latches with a sharp, satisfying click. I picked up the briefcase and turned to face him completely. "Oh, Spencer," I said softly, my tone almost conversational. "You really should check your corporate emails more often." Spencer frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. I tilted my head, looking at him with absolute pity. "You told us earlier that you were in a rush," I replied. "You said you had a very important briefing with your CEO at Sterling Global this afternoon." I watched his eyes widen as a new wave of panic began to set in. "Spencer, did you really think you could weaponize an institutional investment firm without the parent company finding out?" I asked. "Did you really think I would just sit back and let you blackmail my regional bank?" I took a step toward the door, Evelyn falling perfectly into step right beside me. I paused with my hand on the glass door handle and looked back at the terrified, broken man sitting at the head of the table. "Spencer?" I asked, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. "Are you still planning on attending that meeting with your CEO this afternoon?" Spencer stared at me, his jaw slightly open, unable to comprehend the question I had just asked him. He blinked several times, his arrogant brain desperately trying to catch up to the terrifying reality that was rapidly unfolding in front of him. "What are you talking about, Simone?" he stammered, his voice losing all its depth and volume. "How do you know about my meeting with Harrison Cole?" I let go of the glass, Duckware handle, and slowly walked back toward the mahogany table, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I did not sit down. I stood tall, looking down at him with the absolute authority of a woman who had just conquered his entire world. "Because I was sitting in Harrison Cole's penthouse office on Friday afternoon, while you were busy bragging to my parents about freezing my bank accounts," I replied. The name Harrison Cole hit Spencer like a physical blow to the chest. His eyes darted wildly around the room, looking at his lawyer Richard, who had completely stopped packing his briefcase and was now staring at me in sheer disbelief. "You are lying," Spencer breathed, taking a step back until his legs hit his chair. "You do not have access to the chief executive officer of Sterling Global. You are just a local developer." I did not argue with him. I simply opened my black leather briefcase one final time and pulled out a heavy-bound folder embossed with the gold Sterling Global corporate crest. I tossed it onto the center of the table right on top of his ridiculous equity transfer agreement. "Open it, Spencer," I commanded. He reached out with trembling hands and flipped the heavy cover open. His eyes scanned the first page, and I watched his entire corporate identity shatter into a million irreparable pieces. "Let me summarize it for you since you seem to be struggling to read," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent conference room. "When you used your institutional leverage to freeze my regional bank accounts, you left a massive paper trail of unauthorized corporate threats. I took that paper trail directly to your boss. Harrison Cole was incredibly displeased to learn that a mid-level broker was using his company name to blackmail a $30 million commercial development, especially since Sterling Global had already signed a letter of intent to be the anchor tenant for my new plaza." My father Thomas let out a choked gasp, gripping the edge of the table as he realized the sheer magnitude of the players I was dealing with. "He bought out my construction loan, Spencer." I continued, taking a step closer to him. "Sterling Global is now my direct financial lender. Your little bank freeze means absolutely nothing, because I do not need that bank anymore. I have the backing of a multi-billion-dollar international conglomerate, and my funding was fully cleared and wired into my accounts." First thing this morning, Spencer was hyperventilating, his chest heaving, as he stared at the signatures on the contract. "But Harrison Cole and I did not just stop at a loan buyout," I added, lowering my voice to deliver the final lethal blow. "We also signed a 10-year commercial lease agreement." Sterling Global is relocating their primary regional operations into the east wing of my plaza. That includes the boutique equity branch that you work for, Spencer. I watched the realization hit his eyes, the absolute sheer terror of understanding exactly what I had just accomplished. I own this building, Spencer, I said, letting the words hang in the air like a death sentence. I am a senior strategic partner with Sterling Global, and as of this morning, I am officially your landlord. Or at least I would have been. Right on cue. As if the universe itself had perfectly choreographed this exact moment. Spencer's cell phone began to vibrate violently in the breast pocket of his tailored suit. The buzzing sound was deafening in the quiet room. Spencer flinched, pulling the phone out with hands that were shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He looked at the caller ID on the bright screen, and the last remaining drop of blood completely drained from his face. It was the Sterling Global Executive Office. "Answer it, Spencer," I whispered. My eyes locked onto his terrified face. "Do not keep your boss waiting." He fumbled with the screen, his thumb shaking uncontrollably. In his blind panic, his finger slipped and he accidentally hit the speakerphone icon just as he accepted the call. "Spencer." A deep, furious voice boomed through the conference room, echoing off the glass walls. It was Harrison Cole, and he sounded like a man ready to burn a building down. "Yes. Mr. Cole?" Spencer squeaked, his voice cracking like a terrified child. "I am reviewing a report from our legal compliance division," Harrison Cole barked, not wasting a single second on pleasantries. "It outlines a systematic campaign of unauthorized extortion and corporate blackmail directed at one of our top-tier strategic partners, Simone. You used our institutional portfolios to threaten a regional bank, and you filed a fraudulent lawsuit using my corporate letterhead. Mr. Cole, please let me explain." Spencer begged, tears actually welling up in his eyes. "It is a family dispute. I was just trying to secure a better position for—" "Shut your mouth!" Cole roared, cutting him off with lethal precision. "You are a liability and a disgrace to this firm. You are terminated effective immediately. Your corporate access has been revoked, and building security is currently packing your office into cardboard boxes. Do not even think about returning to the premises." Spencer let out a pathetic whimpering sound, completely paralyzed by the public execution of his career. Furthermore, Cole continued, his voice turning ice cold. "Sterling Global will be filing a massive civil lawsuit against you for breach of fiduciary duty and corporate sabotage. We will strip you of every license you hold, and we will ensure you never work in the financial sector again. You are completely finished, Spencer." The line went dead with a sharp click. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence that followed the phone call was heavier than anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. The smartphone slipped from Spencer's sweaty fingers. It hit the polished mahogany table with a loud crack and clattered onto the floor. Spencer's legs completely gave out beneath him. He collapsed, dropping to his knees right there, right on the expensive carpet of the luxury conference room. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a hollow, agonizing groan as the reality of his complete destruction finally crushed him. He had no job, he had no career, he had no house. He was drowning in $500,000 of toxic debt, and he was about to be sued into oblivion by a multi-billion-dollar corporation. To his right, Brianna let out a high-pitched wail, clutching her stomach as she doubled over in her chair. Her perfect designer lifestyle had just been violently ripped away, leaving her with a broke, unemployed husband and a mountain of credit card bills. My mother Denise sat perfectly still, her mouth hanging open, her eyes wide and vacant as she stared at the man she had worshipped. She realized she was going to lose her retirement home because she had bet her entire life on a pathetic fraud. My father. Thomas gripped his chest, his breathing ragged and shallow, his arrogant pride completely broken. The toxic empire they had built on lies, favoritism, and manipulation had completely collapsed around them. I stood at the head of the table, looking down at my family. They were utterly destroyed, and I had not raised my voice a single time. The absolute silence in the room did not last long. It was shattered by my father, Thomas. He suddenly lunged across the mahogany table, grabbing Spencer by the collar of his ruined suit. "You stole from us!" Thomas roared, his voice cracking with unfiltered rage. "You looked me in the eye and took my retirement money. You worthless fraud!" Spencer weakly tried to push my father away, but he had absolutely no strength left. He was completely paralyzed by the reality of his own destruction. "It was not my fault." Spencer sobbed, his arrogant Wall Street persona completely replaced by the whining of a coward. The market crashed. "Thomas, I was just trying to get us a better return on investment." Brianna jumped out of her chair, her face twisted in pure fury. She did not rush to comfort her husband. She rushed forward and began hitting him on the shoulder with her heavy designer handbag. "You lied to me," Brianna screamed, her voice echoing shrilly against the glass walls. "You told me we were rich. You told me the Buckhead house was fully paid off. I cannot be poor. Spencer, I cannot go back to my friends and tell them my husband is an unemployed bankrupt criminal." The golden couple was physically tearing each other apart right in front of my eyes. They were like rats trapped on a sinking ship, turning on each other the second the water touched their feet. My mother, Denise, did not join the screaming match. She slowly stood up from her chair, her legs trembling so violently she could barely support her own weight. She looked at the chaotic scene unfolding at the other end of the table, and then she slowly turned her head to look at me. The absolute terror in her eyes was almost palpable. She stumbled forward, her expensive faux fur coat slipping off her shoulders and dragging on the floor. She closed the distance between us and suddenly threw herself at me. She grabbed my forearm with both hands, her manicured nails digging desperately into the fabric of my tailored blazer. "Simone," she gasped, her face stained with black mascara and heavy tears. "Simone, please, you have to help us." I looked down at the hands gripping my arm, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, deep disgust. "We are going to lose our house." "Simone," my mother sobbed openly, begging me in front of my attorney and the opposing counsel. "Your father and I are going to be homeless. We are getting older, and we have no savings left. Please, honey, you have $30 million. You have the backing of a billionaire. You can pay off our second mortgage with pocket change." She looked up at me, trying to summon that manipulative maternal warmth she had weaponized against me my entire life. "We are family. Simone, we are blood. You cannot just turn your back on your own flesh and blood when we are drowning. God commands us to forgive and support one another." I stood perfectly still, letting her cry and beg and invoke the name of God to save her from her own greed. I waited until her sobbing quieted down into pathetic little hiccups. Then I deliberately and forcefully pulled my arm out of her grasp. I took a step back, putting a clear physical boundary between me and the woman who had birthed me. I slowly reached up and adjusted the lapels of my charcoal gray power suit, brushing off the spot where her hands had just touched me. I looked her dead in the eye, my expression completely devoid of mercy. "You are confused, Denise," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady. "You must have mistaken me for someone who actually cares." My mother recoiled as if I had just slapped her across the face. "But Simone, we are your parents," she whispered. "3 years ago, you sat at a Thanksgiving table and threw a tax debt into my dinner plate." I reminded her, my words slicing through the room like a scalpel. "You told me I was a disappointment. You told me I was an unmarried, childless burden who contributed absolutely nothing to your perfect image. Just last week you called me to gloat when you thought Spencer had frozen my bank accounts. You told me I did not have the temperament for business and that I should surrender my entire life to a mediocre white man just because he wore a nice suit." My father stopped shaking, Spencer, and turned to look at me, his face pale and desperate. "We made a mistake, Simone," Thomas pleaded, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "We trusted the wrong person." But you are our daughter. You have to save us from this. I let out a soft, chilling laugh, shaking my head at their absolute delusion. Save you? I asked. Why on earth would you ask me for financial salvation? Thomas, I am a complete failure, remember? The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of 20 years of emotional abuse. I am just an incompetent woman playing a high-stakes game, completely out of her depth. I continued throwing every single insult they had ever hurled at me right back into their faces. I am the garbage. You told to clean up Aunt Ruby's mess. A failure does not have the money to rescue highly successful people like you and Spencer. Brianna had stopped hitting Spencer and was now staring at me, her mouth hanging open. You are going to let us lose everything? Brianna asked, her voice trembling with absolute shock. You are going to let Mom and Dad live on the street? I did not let anything happen, Brianna, I replied, looking at her ruined designer outfit. You did this to yourselves. You traded your family for a $50,000 check and a fake social media aesthetic. You dug your own graves and now you are angry because I refused to jump into the dirt with you. I turned to Evelyn, who had been watching the entire scene with a quiet professional satisfaction. Are we completely finished here, Evelyn? I asked. Evelyn smiled and picked up her sleek black briefcase. We are absolutely finished, Simone, she replied. There is no legal threat remaining, and the opposing counsel has already packed up his bags. I looked over at Richard Spencer's lawyer. He was standing near the door, looking completely mortified, just waiting for the opportunity to sprint out of the room and distance himself from this massive liability. I turned my back on my family. Simone, do not walk out that door. My father shouted, his voice cracking with a final desperate burst of patriarchal authority. If you walk out that door, you are dead to us. You will have no family left. I paused with my hand on the heavy glass door. I did not look back at them. I died to you people the day you decided my worth was measured by how much I could serve your public image, I said quietly but firmly. Enjoy the foreclosure, Thomas. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out into the quiet, elegant hallway of the law firm. Behind me, the sounds of chaos erupted once again. Brianna started, screaming at Spencer, calling him a fraud and a thief. My mother was wailing uncontrollably, crying out to a God who was definitely not listening. My father was shouting, throwing chairs against the glass walls as his entire world completely unraveled. I did not stop walking. My heels clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor, setting the perfect tempo for my exit. I was leaving them behind, trapped in the burning wreckage of their own toxic creation. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby, feeling lighter than I had ever felt in my entire 35 years of existence. 8 months later, the Atlanta air was crisp and full of absolute promise, as I stood on the raised stage, holding a pair of oversized golden scissors. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly named Sterling Logistics Hub and Commercial Plaza was a massive media event. I wore a custom-tailored, brilliant white suit that stood out perfectly against the bright blue Georgia sky. Flashbulbs went off, and a crowd of local politicians, business leaders, and community members erupted into loud applause as I cut the thick red ribbon, officially opening the $30 million project to the public. Harrison Cole stood right beside me, smiling proudly as the anchor tenant of the property. My executive assistant Maya and my security chief David were cheering from the front row. It was the culmination of 3 years of absolute relentless grind, and I had executed it flawlessly. Just that morning, my face had graced the cover of the premier regional business magazine. The bold headline across the glossy page read, "From Mud to Millions: The Unstoppable Rise of Atlanta Real Estate." Queen, I had built my empire, and I had protected it against the very people who were supposed to love me the most. Meanwhile, the people who shared my bloodline were living a completely different reality. The absolute destruction they had brought upon themselves was swift and merciless. Spencer did not just lose his lucrative job at the boutique equity firm, Harrison Cole kept his promise and unleashed the full terrifying weight of Sterling Global's legal department upon him. They audited every single account Spencer had ever touched, uncovering years of financial mismanagement and corporate embezzlement. He was not just facing civil lawsuits anymore. He was currently sitting in a federal courtroom fighting criminal fraud charges that carried mandatory prison time. His arrogant Wall Street persona had been completely stripped away, leaving behind a terrified broke man facing a decade behind bars. Brianna, of course, did exactly what any parasite does when the host completely runs out of resources. She filed for divorce the exact same week the bank officially foreclosed on their Buckhead mansion and changed the locks. She tried to move back in with our parents, but she quickly discovered that they were in no position to rescue her. Today, the former golden child who used to mock my career and flaunt her leased luxury cars on the internet is living in a cramped studio apartment on the wrong side of the city. She works full-time ringing up customers at a discount retail store, forced to serve the very same working-class people she used to openly look down upon. Her social media accounts have been completely deactivated, and her fake internet friends abandoned her the second the money dried up. But the most poetic justice of all fell upon my parents, Thomas and Denise. The second mortgage they took out to secretly fund Spencer's gambling addiction completely destroyed them. The bank seized their pristine red brick retirement home, the ultimate symbol of their middle-class success, and auctioned it off to the highest bidder. They were forced to pack their belongings into trash bags and move into a small, poorly maintained rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. The worst part for them, however, was not the loss of their wealth, but the total loss of their social standing. The truth always finds a way to come to the light. The details of their greedy extortion attempt and Spencer's massive fraud leaked into our local community. The viral video Brianna had posted crying about being assaulted by corporate thugs backfired completely when the real story circulated. The church elders and the wealthy neighbors who had once praised my parents completely turned their backs on them. Thomas and Denise are now social outcasts too, ashamed to even show their faces at Sunday service, knowing that everyone in the congregation is whispering about their spectacular downfall. They threw away their only loyal daughter to protect their public image, and in the end, they lost absolutely everything. I left the noisy celebration of the ribbon-cutting reception downstairs and took the private elevator up to the roof of the main commercial tower. I stepped out into the cool evening breeze and walked over to the edge of the parapet. The vibrant lights of the Atlanta skyline stretched out before me, a beautiful sprawling grid of endless possibility. I stood there looking down at the highway that brought thousands of vehicles past my property every single day. For a long time, I had carried the heavy burden of wanting my family to finally see my worth. I had wanted my father to be proud of my business acumen, and I had wanted my mother to look at me with the same blind adoration she gave to Brianna. But standing on the rooftop of my own skyscraper, I realized a profound and liberating truth. Family is not always defined by shared blood or a common last name. Sometimes blood is just a biological accident. True family is defined by the people who consistently choose to show up for you. It is defined by the people who respect your boundaries, celebrate your victories, and recognize your value without requiring you to shrink yourself to make them comfortable. I found my family in the brilliant attorneys who fought for me, the security guards who protected me, and the colleagues who believed in my vision when it was nothing but a muddy plot of land. My parents and my sister had tried to bury me. They threw a tax debt in my face, called me a failure, and tried to steal the kingdom I built from the dirt. But they did not realize that I was a seed, and from that dirt I grew an empire that they could never touch. The greatest revenge in life is not found in screaming matches or angry text messages. The absolute best revenge is cutting the dead weight loose, turning your back on the toxicity, and living a massive, brilliant, successful life, completely unbothered by the people who tried to break you. I took one last deep breath of the city air, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. I turned my back on the skyline and walked confidently toward the elevator, ready to rejoin the people who actually mattered. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members who only valued you for what they could extract from you? Have you ever taken the absolute worst hand dealt to you and used it to build something beautiful? I would love to read your stories and experiences in the comment section down below. If this journey of standing up for yourself, establishing unbreakable boundaries, and finding massive success resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilience and triumph. Share this video with anyone who might need a reminder that their worth is not determined by the people who failed to appreciate them. Remember, you have the power to rewrite your own narrative. Keep building your empire and never let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting your peace. I will see you all in the next video.